Not know. Every Secretary General has tried to reform the United Nations. Every single one of them, starting for Dag Hammarskjöld. And of course, Boutros Ghali and de Cuellar and Waldheim and Utan himself, and of course the latest ones, the Kofi Annan and Mr. Ban. Everybody tried to reform the United Nations. But let me just tell you a story. When I was a young man here, I arrived at the UN. One day, a senior woman in my department rushed into my office and said, "Mr. Abbadi, I want to talk to you." I said, "Sure, what is it? Sit down." She said, "Your assistant from a Caribbean island this is 67, is wearing a miniskirt in the UN, and the Under-Secretary General is furious." I said, "Furious? Okay, I will take care of that. Don't worry." So I called the young lady in a few minutes after, and I said, "You know, the UN is a very conservative organization. We have to wear suit and tie. Ladies have dresses and uniforms and decent clothes. You cannot wear this mini skirt. It's too obvious to everybody and it disturbs everybody." She understood and she agreed. And the next and then she didn't wear anymore the miniskirt. The next few weeks, miniskirts spread all over the city and then all over the UN. Now you don't see miniskirts at the UN, right? It's like reforms. They deal with one reform, they restructure the organization, they created new offices and then divide them in new divisions, and then 2 or 3 years after that, we come to the same square box. Nothing changes. So every Secretary General tried to reform the United Nations. Now, for my colleagues' answer, what blocks these reforms? Simply, there is no will on the part of both the UN Secretariat as well as government to modify the structure of the United Nations. Otherwise, they would have done it. Why? Because, as I was telling the President previously, the Charter of the UN clearly states in Article 109 that following 10 years after the signature of the Charter in San Francisco, there should be a general conference, as the Charter puts it. Check that. And to amend the Charter. But some powers do not want to amend the Charter, especially regarding the Security Council. Why? Because it will open a Pandora's box, because they will reform many other things, including, for example, and I do that in the book, I criticize in Article 2 of the Charter, it says clearly the UN cannot intervene in matters of essentially internal affairs. The United Nations, I say in the book, interferes and violates in its own charter every single day. We go there and hold elections. We go there and pass judgment on human rights. We go there and write constitutions. I'm not saying it shouldn't do that. We do that, we go there and do peacekeeping. It's not in the charter. I'm not saying that the organization shouldn't do it. I'm simply saying it should be mandated in the charter, but it's not.
Other question?
Yes. George.
George. You have a big voice, but that's...
Thank you. Forgive me, Abdelkader. I may be showing my ignorance, but you mentioned that all of the Secretaries General were diplomats, with one exception. It doesn't occur to me right off the bat who the one exception was.
Thank you, George, for the question. I put that so that the lucky person will get, where is the free copy? Is that my copy there? Anyway, whoever answers some of my questions will get a free copy. Otherwise, if you buy it from Amazon, it's $15. You buy it from me, it's reduced to $10. But I don't want to use this session for marketing. It's in my office, few of the books, if you are interested. So I want to turn the question to all our colleagues. Who is the Secretary General who didn't have any diplomatic background? Who said it? Annan. Trig Leaf, the first secretary, was a diplomat. Dag Hammarskjöld was diplomat. The Quellar was ambassador. Boutros Ghali was foreign minister, deputy foreign minister. Ban Ki-moon was a deputy foreign minister. All of them except Annan. And by the way, in the book, I devote the entire section on Kofi Annan, a very critical way, for good reasons and objective reasons. I worked with him personally because they would meet with us, the peacekeepers, we called them, and we came from the political department, and we met every month to review the crisis, especially in Africa, and I passed my judgment. A gentleman, Kofi Annan, was the most popular Secretary General, as you know. He comes to in the streets here and in the corridors of the UN, stops secretaries, asks about their families, about their children. He had a perfect PR outside or inside the UN. But when it comes to substance, resolving conflict, nothing. It was only Timor-Leste that was resolved under his administration. And you don't hear this about from anybody else except me at the United Nations. He was appointed special. He was appointed special envoy, as you recall, by Ban Ki-moon on Syria. He quit 6 months after. Now, who would be able to resolve a long-standing conflict in 6 months? He simply ran away. He said they cannot agree, and there is a reason for that. You can guess. That's the second reason question I put to you. Why he quit after 4 months, 6 months only. So, of all the Secretaries General, Kofi Annan was the one that didn't have any diplomatic experience.
So he is regarded as an international, a humanitarian civil servant as opposed to a diplomat.
Nobody passed a judgment on him. He was, in the book, you will read, those of you who will read it, I put an image there. I said, out of a hat, suddenly a magician pulls out a ball out of the hat, bringing up someone of us to be put as Secretary General. He was my colleague. He was a staff member of the United Nations. Personally,
an information officer once upon a time.
Personally, yes. I think that it is a bad precedent and that they should never take someone from us, from the Secretariat, and put them as Secretaries General for reasons that I will not dwell unless you ask for them. Sorry, Ali?
Yes, I just wanted to ask you whether the proposals you have made of eliminating the posts of the Secretary Generals and Under Secretary Generals, would that make any difference? Because unless you change the fundamental structure of the UN, here is the organization which is flawed. The member states are sovereign, the UN is not sovereign. So unless the member states cede power to the United Nations, it cannot become effective.
Well, you are absolutely right. The weaknesses are so ingrained in the UN that you think of this and you think it's impossible to change the UN. But I came to the conclusion that it is possible. The reason I proposed that not the Secretary General, but the Under Secretary General, especially involves Assistant Secretary General, that they be eliminated is this. Because, and I mentioned the word politicization, because the Secretariat has been politicized. And why? Because, as you know, the Under Secretaries General and the Assistant Secretaries Generals are recommended by countries before they get to the UN. We, the general staff, from the general service, secretaries to professionals, P1, P2, until 5, to the highest professions of the professional people, Ds, D1, D2, the directors. That's the end. D2 is the end of the professional life at the UN now. The reason I recommend that is that the status of international civil servant that you refer to is a dying species. because of this politicization, the undersecretaries and assistant secretaries, they gear to their people, their government, and they, at the same time they are employed by the UN. And we should have a neutral administration, international staff, purely, solely, like we take an oath, at the service of the United Nations, and performing functions solely, as the Charter says, in the interest of the United Nations. But we don't have that. We have a mixture of politicians and the heads of the department and staff members who are international civil service, even though this has been diminishing over the years. And this is like the coexistence. Do you know this story, le pot de fer et le pot de terre? It's the pot made out of clay and the pot made out of iron, and they play together. And you know what happens. Who will suffer, who will be broken. It's very clear. So you cannot have a coexistence between political functions and professional functions in the Secretariat. We have to depoliticize the Secretariat. That's why I came these suggestions. Of course, they will not accept that idea.
Yes, thank you. You seem to have answered the part of my question, but I'll ask it anyway. So your long career has spanned over the mandates of various Secretaries General. In your opinion, have they succeeded in this critical position, or at least some of them? If not, why?
Very good question. You have to take a look at the book, because you cover 7 Secretaries General. It's not possible. I even devote 2 or 3 pages for each one just to highlight. Each one has succeeded to some extent and failed to another extent. But some of them were strong Secretaries General. For example, of Dag Hammarskjöld. Boutros Ali tried to do that, and it didn't work. Some of them were timid. Some of them were driven politically. Some of them were driven by their background, their faith. For example, U Thant. U Thant was a man of a moral caliber within the United Nations. I recall as a young officer, right at the stake out of the Security Council during the Vietnam War, he would stand on those steps and would say, and it's in the book, this war is illegal and immoral. And some diplomat will go up to the 38th floor and reprimand him. And then the month after, he will stand there and say, this war is illegal and immoral. Because he acted within the United Nations on the basis of his moral upbringing, his Buddhist traditions, which believed that violence should be not the rule among countries and among people. Peace is the ultimate goal, and he didn't believe in wars as a solution. He believed in political negotiations. Some of them tried in resolving issues. The QLR, for example, succeeded in certain things like Mozambique, like Angola, like South Africa. Others have failed miserably. I gave an example of Annan and Syria. So Mr. Waldheim was walking on eggs because during the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union were competing. He tried to be neutral. It was very difficult for him. But at the same time, he went, the first Secretary General who went to North Vietnam. Then he went to get the hostages from the prisons in Iran, and Khomeini wouldn't accept him. But at the same time, Waldheim, despite the fact that he was accused of belonging to the youth of the Nazis, he presided over, he was a foreign minister of Austria, by the way. He was specialist in outer space and did a great, and he was chairman of the Outer Space Group, Outer Space Affairs Committee. And he presided over very important conferences, such as the Stockholm Environment Conference in '72, you recall that one. He presided over something I worked on for many years, the conference on the law of the sea in Caracas in '74. So each Secretary General has brought in a brick and constructed the edifice of the United Nations, but they all failed in some other ways. And some had strong characters and some not. And I raised the question, I mentioned one quality that all the current candidates don't even speak about. What do you think that would be? Any guess? That they even don't talk about these new current candidates. Independence. No matter what the Secretary General is, if he's not independent, you know, he has to listen to instruction from some power or another. And that's how I relate in the book, for example, about Ban Ki-moon. I was having lunch 9 months before anybody thought of the name Ban Ki-moon with a colleague. And I said, well, it's the turn of Asia. And the colleague said yes. And I said, there are some outstanding candidates in the Asian continent. And I mentioned one of them, that the man who wrote the preface of this book, Tommy Ko, a brilliant ambassador I worked with in the Law of the Sea Conference for 20 years. And my colleague said, no, not Tommy Ko. I said, this Indonesian foreign minister, no. This Pakistani foreign minister, no. I said, well, we have 9 months. We don't know who will be, but we will see. She said, no, we don't wait for 9 months. It's going to be Mr. I said, what? Mr. whom? And my colleague said, Mr. Ban Ki-moon of Korea. I said, no, it's not possible. And the colleague said, why? I said, China will veto Mr. Ban Ki-moon. 9 months after, Mr. Ban Ki-moon was selected or nominated or elected, as you wish to use the term, as Secretary General. Why? That's the point I'm trying to make. Because before each Secretary General is elected, you know, there is an unseen and unheard campaign in the capitals. The country sends its foreign minister or its prime minister or its head of state to certain capitals saying, we want your support for this candidate, our candidate, and in return we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll cooperate with you, we'll trade with you. So how do you control that? That's what they don't talk about in the current atmosphere of talking about selecting Secretary Generals. You know, we're going to have to be careful about these new candidates. They just say, oh, we're going to be transparent. We're going to work for the interest of the United Nations. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. I would like to ask them how independent they will be, and will they put that in writing? That's one prominent quality, besides being effective and efficient and have the integrity, et cetera, et cetera. So countries usually, especially major powers, do not like strong, independent Secretary General. You know why? It's like a business. They want to know and anticipate the actions of the Secretary General, no matter who it is or she is. They don't want surprises. So they select someone on whom they have confidence and whom they are reliably informed that he will not shake earth. That's why we don't get anything deep reforms in the UN, because sometimes commitments are made in the capitals. Did I take long enough, talk long enough?
We have a question from Stephanie. The microphone is behind you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Abbadi, for this interesting.
But I would like to ask James if he can stop, because you...
Oh, I'm really sorry.
That's okay.
No.
Yeah, because you're another planet, and so it looks
No,
like
no,
that. Unless it's a breaking news of this subject, so it's...
No, I apologize. Sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Abbadi, thank you for this, very interesting. But just to make sure that I understood your line, okay? you talk about you love you love the United Nations. I mean, not only you have such incredible experience, but you still believe on the United Nations. But for not being an utopia, because you've been saying now, you know, the Secretary General, we all know that the Secretary General has to be weak, because if not, he will never be elected. And you propose, if I understood well, to change the name from Secretary General to Executive Officer, something like this?
International Executive Officer.
International Executive Officer. Because names are very important. Of course, it's not, there is a reason why it was called Secretary General. Now, I have a proposal. I don't know if it's in your book, but what do you think about, for example, eliminating the 2 terms and just doing 1 term, just prolong it, let's say 7 years, okay? That will eliminate the fact that as soon as he's elected, you know, he doesn't have to please anymore anybody to be re-elected. So this could be, so I want to know what you think about this proposal. And then here they always repeat, especially at the press briefing, when we ask questions and we say, why the United Nations, you know, when we get emotional like you did, like, why the United Nations doesn't do that? You know, they answer to us, the United Nations is the countries, the 193, whatever now they are, and countries put it together. That's what is the United Nations. It's not the United Nations. So even the United Nations itself, the bureaucracy, if you want, doesn't believe that they are